The shocking events began when Rob Reiner's last will was read aloud. In that moment, the family dynamic shifted irreversibly. His son Nicholas, often called Nick, was explicitly cut out of the inheritance, with no public reason given and no softening words offered. The document was read in a quavering voice by Billy Crystal, Rob's longtime close friend, who appeared visibly shaken, struggling to process the gravity of what he was announcing. This revelation marked just the start of a cascade of devastating developments that stunned the entertainment world. Around the same time, Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, vanished from public view, leaving their luxurious $13.5 million Brentwood home eerily empty. There was no prior warning, no statement, just an abrupt absence that sparked widespread speculation and concern. Behind the facade of a prominent, seemingly ideal Hollywood family lay a tangled web of hidden tensions, immense wealth, and revelations far more intricate than anyone outside had suspected. What truly transpired in private? This isn't merely tabloid gossip. It's a profound family tragedy laced with mystery. Authorities later confirmed the devastating truth. The individual responsible for the fatal incident involving Rob and Michelle was no outsider. It was someone intimately connected, none other than their own son, Nicholas. The public didn't uncover this through dramatic headlines or a drawn-out probe at first. Instead, the harsh reality surfaced through the will itself. A final, irrevocable statement that served not only to distribute assets, but also to deliver a stark judgment. It shattered the long-cultivated image of the perfect Reiner household that Rob had upheld for more than 40 years, laying bare the deep, unnoticed fissures that had built up over time. This wasn't a standard celebrity scandal. It was a heartbreaking tale of concealed pain, unspoken disloyalty, and the razor-thin boundary between parental devotion and decisive disconnection. And crucially, the roots stretched back much further than the day of the tragedy. Picture a calm Sunday morning in Brentwood, California. Golden light floods the opulent $13.5 million property, a showcase of achievement and apparent harmony. The estate, with its elegant marble details and verdant landscaping, resembles a scene from one of Rob's own films. Yet beneath the surface, unease lingered. Rob and Michelle had arranged a relaxed late lunch with their kids. But messages to daughter Romy went unread. Son Jake hadn't responded since the night before, and youngest son Nicholas had been out of touch for 2 full days, quietly staying in the guest house on the grounds. Around 9:32 a.m., Romy arrived alone through the gate. Just 3 minutes later, she placed a panicked call. "Something's terribly wrong. I believe my brother is connected to this." To grasp how events reached this breaking point, we need to step back 3 days earlier, before the deaths. Before Nicholas became the central figure in a horrifying inquiry, and before Billy Crystal, hands unsteady, opened that sealed envelope and recited the fateful line, "My son Nicholas shall receive no portion of my estate, for reasons well known to him." Those weren't impulsive words of frustration. This was a formal, notarized, witnessed legal instrument, executed a mere 72 hours prior to Rob's death. It carried the weight of both law and profound emotional finality, striking at the core of an already strained family bond. Billy wasn't merely the will's reader. He was Rob's most trusted confidant in those closing days. Reports indicate that about a week beforehand, Rob placed a late-night call to Billy. His tone was exhausted, worried, and edged with dread. "I don't know how to handle Nick anymore. I feel like he resents me." Billy offered comfort, but Rob only exhaled heavily. "I'm taking care of matters. If something happens to me, promise you'll handle this." In that exchange, a father's deep fear of his own child became painfully clear. The will represented neither simple protection nor petty retribution, but a desperate final act amid a family teetering on collapse. Nicholas Reiner's name had long been linked to difficulties. His path included bouts of instability, substance abuse challenges, difficulties managing emotions, and persistent whispers of erratic conduct in professional settings. Multiple rehab stays and ongoing family friction placed ongoing pressure on the household. Still, Rob consistently stood by his son, offering monetary help, backing his endeavors, and letting him reside in the estate's guest house. For some, this reflected enduring paternal love. For others, it raised questions about where support crossed into overindulgence. That very backdrop rendered the circumstances of the incident especially chilling. No forced entry, no activated security alarms, no evidence of an intruder. The events played out in a space Nicholas could access freely and routinely. The first person to realize something was terribly wrong was Rob Reiner, the 27-year-old youngest daughter who was especially close to her mother, Michelle. In the verified 911 call that followed, Romy struggled to stay composed, breaking down in sobs as she told the operator, "I think something has happened to my parents." She described the heated arguments and rising tensions she'd overheard in the days leading up to that moment, along with her growing sense that the situation was spiraling dangerously out of control. To grasp why Nick appeared to have such detailed knowledge of events, however, one must look past the surface-level information available to the public. While speculation swirls in the media and among observers, certain individuals had noticed warning signs well in advance, and even attempted to alert Rob. One such person was Tracy Reiner, his adopted daughter, who had largely stepped away from public attention in recent years. Her private disclosures, shared confidentially, are said to have added significant layers of complexity to the unfolding events. Before exploring those aspects further, one critical moment stands out: the last known conversation between Rob and Nick. According to accounts from those with knowledge of the situation, it went far beyond a typical family disagreement. It was a grave warning that concluded with chilling words that still evoke unease when recounted. What exactly transpired during those final hours? What deep-seated issues were building beneath the surface? And amid the turmoil, why did Nick end up as the sole survivor left to recount the events? It all started on what appeared to be an ordinary Sunday morning in the upscale Brentwood neighborhood. Birds sang among the soft purple jacaranda blossoms, and fountains bubbled across perfectly tended lawns in a setting of refined calm. It was difficult to fathom that inside the gates at 1389 Stonebrook Lane, a devastating tragedy was quietly taking shape. Rob Reiner, then 78, and his wife Michelle, 70, had arranged a relaxed late breakfast for the family. Freshly baked bagels, smoked salmon, and Michelle's signature grapefruit tart. Jake and Romy were expected, while Nick, as was typical, stayed in the guest house near the tennis court. From the outside, it looked like a standard family get-together, but later investigations revealed that things quickly deviated from normal. The morning sequence was reconstructed using phone records, security footage, and statements from the household staff. Around 7 a.m., Rob was observed in the kitchen brewing coffee in a peaceful atmosphere. Shortly after, Michelle joined him to start preparing the meal, a routine scene briefly captured on the home's security cameras. Soon afterward, Rob took a brief phone call. Sources familiar with the call logs noted that his behavior shifted markedly afterward. He became withdrawn and visibly on edge. The caller's identity has not been publicly disclosed. The housekeeper arrived not long after and observed that the guest house lights were already on unusually early. She also recalled hearing a loud sound, but dismissed it at the time. Around 8:09 a.m., Romy sent a text to Michelle asking about the delayed breakfast, receiving no response. Testimony later indicated that the housekeeper overheard a heated argument in the main residence around then. Raised voices of a man and a woman, filled with urgency and distress. Though the specific words were unclear, the tone was unmistakably abnormal. A key point that drew investigators' scrutiny occurred around 9 a.m. The front hallway security camera abruptly ceased recording for approximately 17 minutes before restarting. Forensic analysis later determined the interruption resulted from deliberate manual interference. Remarkably, during that window, no one was captured entering or exiting the property. Unable to reach her parents and growing concerned, Romy drove over to the house. She entered without triggering any alarms or spotting obvious disturbances from the outside. Inside, she encountered an oppressive quiet, overturned furniture, and visible blood. Moments later, her screams pierced the air, prompting the lengthy 911 call, over 6 minutes long, during which she was heard frantically calling her parents' names in utter panic. When the dispatcher inquired whether anyone else was present, she tearfully replied that she hadn't seen her brother. Her fragmented, horrified statements captured the profound trauma of someone confronting an unimaginable horror. At the scene, investigators found no evidence of a break-in or theft. The violence appeared confined to the familiar surroundings of the family residence. One detail repeatedly noted in subsequent accounts was that Nick was not at the home when authorities arrived. According to people close to the situation, underlying strains within the Reiner family had been building for years, long-standing disputes, disagreements, and mounting pressures that never fully resolved. For many observers, that Sunday morning marked not a sudden outbreak, but the tragic culmination of those unresolved issues. Within that broader context, matters related to property, inheritance, and estate planning were widely believed to have heightened the family's fragility. To understand the backdrop, consider events from 3 nights earlier, on Thursday evening. Legal records referenced in later proceedings indicate that Rob and Michelle visited their attorney's office in a composed but somber frame of mind. There was no visible conflict or emotional outburst. They sat down, reviewed documents, and Rob began by stating calmly, "We want to make a few changes." The decision documented in the will was final and unequivocal. Rob had explicitly excluded his son Nicholas from any inheritance, offering no elaborate justification or extended discussion, just one concise, legally enforceable line. "My son Nicholas will receive no portion of my estate for reasons he fully understands." When the lawyer sought confirmation of the exact phrasing, Rob stood firm and made no revisions. Michelle raised no objections. The document was signed, witnessed, and executed without further changes. Only a handful of people were aware of this development, according to those closest to the family. 3 days later, on Sunday morning around 10 a.m., police arrived at the property. Soon afterward, officers cordoned off the guest house located behind the main residence. What immediately struck investigators was that Nick was absent during that critical morning window, and no one recalled seeing him depart. It was later confirmed that the security cameras inside the guest house had been deliberately disabled from within. The interior of the guest house presented a disordered picture: an unzipped bag, clothing strewn across the floor, and a notebook with numerous pages ripped out. The surviving pages contained agitated, handwritten entries filled with intense emotion, though the precise wording was never made public. Another item entered the case file: a locked fireproof safe discovered in the closet. Inside lay a photocopy of an earlier version of the will, drafted well before the recent revisions. Its presence in that location immediately prompted unanswered questions: how it got there, who placed it, and exactly when. That same afternoon, after identifying Nick as a person of interest, authorities obtained an arrest warrant. Within hours, he was located at a service station more than 50 miles away. According to reports, he appeared composed and did not resist apprehension. During initial questioning, the only statement he made, later transcribed, was brief: "They cornered me. I did nothing." Those words, conveying both denial and a sense of being unfairly targeted, became a focal point of the investigation. Yet they shed little light on the events themselves. Meanwhile, back at the house, the most harrowing account came from Rob Reiner. She had arrived expecting to join her parents for a family breakfast, only slightly delayed. The moment she stepped inside, an oppressive stillness hit her, not the peaceful hush of a late morning, but something far heavier and more suffocating. She called out for her mother and father. Silence answered. Moving deeper into the home, she encountered the first signs of violence: overturned furniture, a framed family photograph lying face down with its glass shattered. In that picture, everyone had once been smiling together, a painful contrast to the destruction surrounding it. Trails of blood guided her toward the master bedroom, where she discovered the horrific scene that would haunt her forever. Her 911 call, which lasted more than 6 minutes, captured raw terror, grief, and stunned disbelief as a daughter confronted the murder of both parents. In the recording, Romy instinctively mentioned her brother, not as a formal accusation, but as an immediate, visceral certainty born from years of underlying family strain. The unwavering conviction in her voice unsettled even those who listened to the tape afterward. The central unanswered question remains: what led Romy to point toward her brother so quickly? According to people familiar with the family's history, the explanation does not rest solely in the events of that Sunday morning, but in a long, quiet buildup of tension that had been simmering for years. Later testimony revealed that although Romy did not reside in the main house, She visited often enough to observe subtle but disturbing shifts in dynamics. She noticed her mother flinching whenever Nick entered a room, her father's gaze constantly tracking his son during meals, and interior doors that had begun to be kept locked, behavior that was previously uncommon. 3 nights earlier, on Thursday evening, Romy had stopped by late to drop off script pages for her father, planning only a brief visit. As she walked past the guest house, she overheard a heated confrontation. She described it as furious shouting, not slurred or uncontrolled, but cold, deliberate, and heavy with rage. One voice, deep, firm, and authoritative, she was certain belonged to her father. The words that carried clearest through the night were, "This is over. There will be no second chance." At the time, Romy did not fully grasp their significance. Only in hindsight did those words become permanently etched in her memory. She also told police about another discovery made roughly 2 weeks before the tragedy. While helping her mother reorganize an old cabinet, Romy found a sealed envelope tucked behind a stack of table linens. Handwritten on the front were the words, "Only to be opened upon my death," followed by Rob's signature. When she asked Michelle about it, her mother appeared visibly uneasy and gave only a vague reply. Rob was concerned about potential family troubles ahead. Soon afterward, the envelope disappeared from its hiding place. Those fragmented memories flooded back to Romy as she crossed the threshold that Sunday morning, expecting nothing more than a delayed family breakfast, only to be met by the same unnatural, suffocating silence that greeted her from the very first step inside the house. Romy Reiner, the 27-year-old youngest daughter of Rob and Michelle Reiner, and known for her close bond with her mother, was the first to uncover the unfolding horror. In a verified 911 call that lasted 6 minutes, Romy struggled to stay composed, repeatedly breaking down in sobs as she told the dispatcher, "I think something has happened to my parents." She referenced recent family tensions and arguments she'd overheard, along with a growing sense of dread that events were spiraling beyond control. To grasp why Nick Reiner appeared unusually aware of the situation, investigators examined the family's dynamics. Deep-seated conflicts, particularly over property, inheritance rights, and the recent revision of the will, had left relationships increasingly strained. Rewind to 3 nights earlier, on Thursday evening. Court records later revealed that Rob and Michelle Reiner visited their lawyer's office in a calm yet somber atmosphere. No raised voices, no visible distress. They sat, reviewed documents, and Rob spoke plainly. "We want to make a few changes." The decision was firm and final. Their son Nicholas would be excluded from the estate. The clause was brief and unambiguous. "My son Nicholas will not receive any share of my estate for reasons he himself understands." The lawyer sought confirmation of the exact wording. Rob stood resolute. Michelle raised no objection. The document was signed, witnessed, and sealed. Those close to the family noted that only a handful of people knew about the alteration. In the days that followed, this revelation fueled intense speculation about how Nick learned of it. Meanwhile, Romy's memories haunted her. She recalled an envelope her father had kept hidden under the tablecloth, marked "Only open when I die," and signed by Rob. When she inquired, Michelle seemed uneasy and only replied that Rob was concerned about family matters. Soon after, the envelope vanished. These recollections flooded back on that tragic morning when Romy entered the house, expecting a routine family gathering. Instead, an oppressive silence greeted her. No voices, no activity, only a suffocating weight in the air. She called out to her parents but heard nothing in return. In the living room, a cherished family photo lay in pieces on the floor, the smiling faces now fractured. The sight stunned her. Then she noticed trails of blood leading toward the bedroom. In an instant, years of pent-up worries and fears surged to the surface. During the frantic 911 call that ensued, Romy was overwhelmed. When asked who might be involved, she instinctively mentioned her brother, not as a formal accusation, but as a gut reaction shaped by years of observing his instability and the warning signs she'd witnessed before. She recounted a recent visit to the guest house to retrieve a cable, where she glimpsed an open notebook on the table. Though she didn't read it closely, the raw, emotional handwriting chilled her. While the full contents were never disclosed, Romy described it as conveying deep anger, betrayal, and profound loss. When authorities later secured the guest house, they found a space starkly at odds with its affluent exterior. Sparse furniture, perpetually drawn curtains, and clear evidence of isolation and turmoil. Police seized personal items, documents, and notebooks as part of the investigation. To outsiders, it was merely a secondary residence on a prominent family's property, but inside it revealed a far darker existence. Romy wasn't alone in coming forward. In the aftermath, Tracy Reiner, another family member who typically shunned publicity, also cooperated with investigators, offering insights that shed new light on the long-simmering tensions within the family. The central question lingers: what truly transpired behind those closed doors? Were the red flags Romy recalled grounded in reality, or were they amplified by prolonged fear? Investigators continue to seek answers. To understand the backdrop, consider Nick Reiner's trajectory. Once seen as a rising talent in Hollywood, the son of Rob Reiner and grandson of Carl Reiner, he grew up surrounded by creativity and privilege. His early public appearances suggested he might carry on the family's artistic legacy. Yet beneath the glamour, challenges mounted. Nick grappled with addiction from a young age, compounded by substance abuse, alcohol, repeated rehab stints, and mental health struggles that destabilized his 20s. The weight of the family name, a fragmented career, and personal crises eroded his stability. Public incidents made headlines and faded, but underlying issues persisted. Rob never abandoned his son. In 2015, they collaborated on Being Charlie, a semi-autobiographical film drawn from Nick's battles with addiction. For Rob, it was an effort to guide his son toward recovery, but the project underperformed commercially, dealing a heavy blow to Nick's confidence. Hope dimmed, and he withdrew further. This leads back to the guest house, where Nick resided for years. After the tragedy, police described it as dim, minimalist, with curtains always closed, hallmarks of seclusion. In a locked fireproof box, they discovered an old knife, not linked directly to the crime but kept symbolically, accompanied by an ambiguous note that read more like a caution than a plan. Seized diaries and documents revealed Nick's recurring feelings of being sidelined, replaced, and without a place in the family, subjective sentiments from his writings, not official findings. Investigators zeroed in on one key puzzle. How did Nick learn of the will's changes, finalized just days before the incident and known to very few? Evidence suggested possible access to private family discussions, though this was never conclusively proven in public records. Among the items recovered was a collection of letters Rob had written to Nick over the years, spanning encouragement, disappointment, and growing helplessness. Paired with the will's exclusion clause, these underscored a father's exhaustion and heartbreak. For many observers, the emotional impact of this revelation was devastating. Nick's downfall felt almost predestined, yet he wasn't the only one hiding secrets. Buried within the family's digital files, investigators uncovered a folder of secretly recorded private conversations. One brief clip stood out in particular. Rob's voice, raw with worry, expressing deep concern about his son's deteriorating mental health. The audio cut off abruptly into static, leaving troubling gaps and unanswered questions. Then Nick vanished, quietly, without drama. Surveillance footage from a remote gas station showed him calmly purchasing a bottle of water before walking out of view, composed and unhurried. That silence didn't hold for long. Another figure, someone who understood the Reiner family more intimately than almost anyone, had stayed deliberately distant for years. Now she was ready to come forward. What she carried had the power to fundamentally shift how the entire tragedy would be remembered. When Tracy Reiner finally spoke, she confirmed not only the worst suspicions but also a hidden truth no one had anticipated. It started with a letter Michelle had sent Tracy exactly 3 days before the killings. Picture the moment. You open an envelope and realize your own child might be capable of destroying everything you've built. What words would you choose in that desperate hour? And what if those words remained unread until it was far too late? The letter held no warmth, no reassurances, no outpouring of feeling, just a date, a signature, and one stark, solemn sentence centered on the page. This is my truth. Strangely, Rob had stored it in an ordinary bedside drawer, the one right next to Nick's side of the bed, for years. Not locked in a safe, not filed away in an office cabinet, but easily accessible. Many later speculated that Rob had left it there intentionally, hoping the right person would eventually find it. and only one person truly grasped its weight: Tracy. Tracy had not attended the initial reading of the will. She wasn't even in California when the murders occurred. She had quietly relocated to Oregon years earlier, living a low-profile life far removed from Hollywood, working in local theater and volunteering at an animal shelter. Yet 3 days after the bodies were discovered, she arrived unannounced at the West Los Angeles police station. No media, no entourage. She carried a sealed envelope bearing Rob's unmistakable handwriting and spoke 2 sentences that rippled through the investigation. "He wrote this to me. I believe he knew he would never get the chance to send it." Looking back, Tracy and Rob had barely spoken in recent years. Tensions over Nick, family therapy, inheritance disputes, divided loyalties had grown unbearable. Still, one constant remained. Rob had always trusted Tracy implicitly. 3 days before the murders, he sent her a brief email. The subject line contained only 4 words: "If anything happens." No greeting, no context, just an attachment simply named draft. It was not a will or any legal instrument. It was a confession. The opening line landed like a stone. "I have spent more than 10 years trying to protect Nick from himself. I must now accept that I have failed." In plain, unsparing language, Rob described how Nick's behavior had darkened over time, outbursts turning into outright threats, a household living under constant tension. He disclosed incidents previously kept private: the 2019 moment Nick hurled a heavy glass ashtray at his brother Jake, the birthday celebration where Nick gripped Michelle's hands until bruises formed, the therapy session in which Nick shouted that the whole family dynamic was fake and vowed they would regret it when I leave or when you die. The most devastating passage came when Rob admitted his own blindness and complicity. "I watched Michelle shrink in his presence. I saw terror in her eyes and told myself it was nothing. That was my failure." This was more than a parent grieving a wayward son. It was a man laying bare his guilt, his weakness, and his complicity. The document took an even darker turn when Rob revealed that Nick had repeatedly threatened him personally, promising to ruin him, to take everything by force if his demands went unmet, declaring he would rather watch the family collapse than compromise. Rob weighed every possible step: a restraining order, police involvement, court protection. Yet each time he pulled back. He was still a father. He still clung to hope that Nick might change. Most painfully, he wrote that he refused to let his legacy become the reason his son ended up behind bars. But he drew one clear, unbreakable line: "If anything ever happens to me or to Michelle, it will not be an accident. Nick is not the victim here. Do not allow him to inherit anything from me." Those words later became the emotional cornerstone of the prosecution's opening argument. When a person writes a precise forecast of their own murder, it ceases to be paranoia. It demands to be heard. Tracy kept the email and its attachment confidential until police publicly confirmed Nick's arrest. Only then did she act. She boarded a flight and flew directly to Los Angeles. Angela stepped forward, carrying a printed copy of the letter, placed it deliberately on the table in front of the investigators, and stated with quiet force, "You're looking for motive? It's right here." But the reality turned out to be far more disturbing. The letter wasn't written solely for Tracy. Rob had actually created a second copy, planning to forward it to his attorney. That second version never reached its destination. It vanished from his sent items. The only remnant was a recoverable draft. When forensic experts retrieved it, they discovered the email had been accessed and opened from an unfamiliar device. Investigators grew convinced that Nick, likely by secretly monitoring or gaining access to his father's computer, had read the contents before Rob could even hit send. From that point onward, events began to unravel irreversibly. Try to imagine yourself in Nick's position for a moment. You open an email and find your own father describing you as dangerous, irredeemable, someone unworthy of trust or inheritance. Someone he fears. How would you respond? Walk away quietly? Or feel compelled to permanently silence the person who had just laid bare what he saw as your real character? That exact question tormented the investigators and became the central thread the prosecution followed throughout the case. Yet the letter was only part of the picture. That same day, Rob had also made a voice memo. His tone at first was steady but weighed down, each sentence chosen with visible care. "If I'm making this recording," he began, It's because I need someone to hear it, in case those other words disappear. He went on to describe the escalating confrontations with Nick, the increasingly explicit threats. He said Nick was turning Romy and Jake against him, poisoning their mother's perception of him. He claimed Nick had warned that if he were cut out of the will, he would vanish from Rob's life forever. Rob stopped, drew a long breath. When he spoke again, exhaustion and buried anguish were audible in every word. I didn't want to believe he could actually hurt us. I never imagined it would reach this point. If something happens to me, please, don't make excuses for him. Tell him the truth no matter how brutal it is. The recording closed with an extended, heavy sigh, the sound of a man torn between paternal devotion and genuine dread. Together, the letter, the voice memo, and Tracy's account rapidly became the cornerstone of the entire investigation. These were no longer ambiguous fragments, malfunctioning cameras, inconsistent timelines, or secondhand rumors. They constituted direct evidence of premeditation, of tension stretched to the breaking point. A slow-burning fuse had finally reached the charge. And then the most painful question inevitably surfaced. If Rob lived in such fear, why didn't he take decisive action earlier? Why no restraining order? Why didn't he insist Nick leave the house? Why didn't he confide fully in Romy, Jake, or Tracy? The answer, though mercilessly straightforward, cuts deep. Because Rob Reiner, despite all his public strength and professional stature, was in the end simply a father. A father incapable of completely giving up on his son. A father who clung to the faint hope that things could still get better. As Tracy later explained, even when terror was screaming inside him, he kept choosing hope. Right until the final moment, he still loved Nick, and it was precisely that enduring love that caused him to hesitate, to delay, and ultimately to pay the highest price. The letter and the recording were never meant for public eyes, yet today they serve as the clearest window into what really happened. When you hear or read the final private words of a father begging others to understand and protect, those words lodge in the memory in a way almost nothing else can. Later in court, it was Billy Crystal who rose when the judge asked who would read Rob's last will and testament aloud. He accepted the envelope, unfolded the pages, and began. But the instant his gaze reached the section concerning Nick, his hands started shaking. A stunned hush fell over the courtroom. Every sentence seemed to carry its own pulse of grief and disbelief. This tragedy did not begin with violence. It began years earlier with small, accumulating signals. Doors slammed hard enough to rattle frames, shouting matches reverberating through the Beverly Hills house, windows described as accidentally broken, bruises explained away as clumsy falls. Nick's anger did not ignite overnight. It had been quietly smoldering for a long time, building pressure year after year. The first moment the family truly saw the depth of that rage came as a shock they would carry forever. In the summer of 2009, 16-year-old Nick had recently returned from his second rehab stay. Rob and Michelle hoped that several weeks in the Hamptons, new surroundings, private counseling, distance from Los Angeles, might finally bring calm. Instead, Nick resented everything. The therapists, the structure, the constant feeling of being monitored and evaluated. Tracy Reiner, who was present that summer, later recalled that Nick's irritability had changed. It was no longer explosive outbursts. It had become colder, more deliberate. Sometimes he wouldn't shout at all. He would simply sit motionless, watching. Then one evening at dinner, everything detonated. The family, Rob, Michelle, Jake, Romy, and Nick, was eating together. Tracy had stepped outside briefly. The conversation was ordinary, even warm, centered on Jake's upcoming college film project. Rob made an offhand comment. "Nick, maybe you could keep an eye on Jake this fall. It might give you some healthy structure." The sound of Nick's fork hitting the table was like a gunshot. He shoved his chair back violently enough to knock Romy's water glass over, stood up, and shouted, "Stop trying to fix me. You only care when the cameras are on you." Rob went rigid. Jake attempted to de-escalate the situation. Romy broke into tears. Michelle rose to her feet. "Nick, that's enough. Sit down." But Nick refused to back off. In a sudden burst of fury, he hurled his wine glass. It sailed past Michelle, barely missing her, and exploded against the tabletop. For several long seconds, Michelle remained motionless in her chair, silent and visibly crushed, offering no response. That evening marked the first time the entire family had seen Nick unleash his full, unfiltered anger, but it would not be the last. From that point forward, Nick's downward spiral accelerated. He abruptly left the Hamptons, skipping 3 days of scheduled outpatient treatment. When he finally returned home, he was visibly intoxicated on drugs and spent the entire drive screaming at Rob. Neighbors, alarmed by the shouting, phoned the police. Rob waved them away, insisting, "It's just a family argument. We're okay." In truth, nothing was okay. That summer marked a permanent fracture. Rob began locking his office door each night. Michelle quietly removed knives and other sharp objects from the kitchen drawers. Jake drastically reduced the time he spent at home. Romy started attending therapy sessions on her own, and Nick grew steadily more volatile and threatening. At 18, while collaborating with his father on a student short film, Rob providing financing, editing support, everything, Nick was devastated when the festival selection committee rejected it over concerns about its subject matter. He erupted in the producer's office, screaming insults, flinging staplers and other objects, until security forcibly removed him. Rob quietly paid for the damage and said nothing publicly, but the damage within the family widened. Later, a private text exchange between Nick and a former girlfriend, an actress he had briefly dated, leaked. When she wrote, "You're scaring me," his reply was chilling. "Good." The incident stayed out of the headlines, yet the emotional scars inside the household never healed. In 2015, there appeared to be a brief thaw. Nick and Rob co-wrote the screenplay for Being Charlie, a semi-autobiographical drama centered on addiction and fractured family dynamics. To the outside world, it looked like reconciliation. Behind the scenes, the reality was far bleaker. One crew member later recalled, "They fought constantly, even though he doesn't want that repeated." Nick felt increasingly erased as Rob rewrote large portions of the script. At one point he said bitterly, "This stopped being my story. He's taking it away from me." The finished film earned lukewarm reviews and bombed commercially. Soon afterward, Nick vanished from sight once more. By 2018, when Rob reportedly stopped the monthly financial support he had been providing, Nick's response was explosive. Uninvited, he appeared at Romy's graduation celebration heavily intoxicated. He shouted at guests, overturned chairs, and created chaos. Michelle pleaded with him to leave. No one summoned the police. Around that same time, Rob quietly drafted an initial version of his will, only to tear it up later, still clinging to the hope that his son could change. That hope would eventually prove tragically misplaced. The incident that remained private until the trial took place in 2021. Nick was staying in the guest house. Rob had just wrapped a demanding project and was exhausted. Over dinner, a heated dispute erupted concerning inheritance, perceived abandonment, and entitlement. Nick's words were ominous. "If you won't let me in, I'll show you what happens when you're locked out." Later that night, at 3:15 a.m., Michelle woke to find Nick standing silently at the foot of their bed, shining a flashlight. He claimed he was searching for his phone charger. No phone was visible. That was the night Rob confided in Tracy that he was genuinely afraid. It was the night Michelle began considering relocation. Jake quietly suggested changing the locks. Romy whispered to someone close, "If something bad happens, it's going to be him." Still, no one contacted authorities. After all, he was family. When the murders finally occurred, Rob and Michelle were the victims. Nick was taken into custody within hours. To everyone who had watched the slow-burning tension build over years, the outcome felt almost inevitable, an unbearable pressure that had been accumulating for too long before finally detonating in violence. The central haunting question lingered. What did Nick believe was rightfully his? And how far would he go to seize it? A partial answer surfaced in a private audio recording made between Rob and Billy Crystal just days before the trial began. In it, Rob confessed his terror. He told Billy that Nick had warned, if he didn't receive what he felt entitled to, he would take it himself, and ensure no one could interfere. Billy tried to offer comfort, but the words hung heavy and final. When Billy Crystal, longtime friend, Oscar host, beloved comedian, and eulogist, was handed the sealed envelope in court and asked to read its contents aloud, the courtroom held its breath. No one anticipated the devastation those few lines would cause. Billy's hand shook as he opened the envelope. He cleared his throat and read, "My son Nicholas will receive nothing from my estate for reasons he knows well." He stopped, eyes filling with tears, and murmured, almost to himself, "Oh, Rob." The room erupted. Rob and Billy had been close since the late 1970s, their friendship forged through the highs and lows of Hollywood life. When Rob telephoned Billy in the dead of night, only a week before the killings, it was not casual conversation. It was the anguished plea of a father who already sensed the unthinkable was coming. Love by itself was not enough to protect his child. People close to Billy reported that Rob had finally reached his limit. In a quiet, late-night conversation, he confided in Billy, "I'm convinced Nick is going to hurt someone. It could be me. It could be Michelle." Billy lay frozen in bed, stunned into silence. After a long pause, Rob continued, "I've just finished my new will. He has to be excluded. I can't keep living like this." Billy immediately urged him to take concrete steps, leave the house, contact the police, retain an attorney, anything to create distance and safety. Rob wouldn't hear of it. He asked for only one promise. "If something happens to me, I want you to be the one who reads it aloud." Billy begged him to reconsider, but Rob was resolute. 7 days later, Billy found himself in a somber conference room surrounded by family, Jake, Romy, Tracy, and several attorneys. Every pair of eyes was locked on him, the air thick with dread. He opened the envelope and began to read, delivering each sentence that no one wanted to hear. When he reached the passage concerning Nick, Romy let out an involuntary gasp. Jake's hands clamped down on the armrests until his knuckles blanched. Tracy gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as though she had long expected this outcome. Billy lowered the pages for a moment, his shoulders sagging. Quietly, he said, "Rob never wanted to cause pain. He wanted peace for the family, and he wanted the truth to be known. He loved every one of you, but he felt he had no other choice. He told me once, 'Legacy isn't about what you leave behind, it's about what you shield from harm.'" In the end, Rob chose to shield the rest of the family. He resumed reading until the document was finished. A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the room. No one spoke, no one moved. Nick was not present, yet the words would reach him, echoing across hundreds of miles. Later, Billy told journalists that standing there and reading those pages was among the most painful moments of his life. More difficult than burying his own father, more wrenching than hosting the Oscars in the shadow of September 11th, more agonizing than any words he had ever been asked to speak. That document was far more than a legal instrument. It was a desperate, belated cry for help, one Rob had been trying to send for months, one no one had managed to answer in time. Very few people knew that Rob had also left Billy a private, handwritten letter never meant for public release. In it, he wrote, "You've always been the calm, reasonable voice I could trust. If I can't say these things myself, I need you to say them for me. Don't let the story be twisted. Don't let the truth disappear with me. Tell them exactly what I witnessed, what terrified me, what I came to understand." Billy honored that request. He spoke the truth first in the lawyer's office, then in front of news cameras, in courtrooms, and finally on national television. 2 weeks after the tragedy, he sat down with Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes. Before the taping, Romy called him and said simply, "Dad trusted you to tell it." Facing the camera, Billy recounted the late-night phone calls, the mounting dread in Rob's voice, the guilt he carried, the quiet terror that had been growing for years. "Rob loved Nick," he said. "That love never stopped. But he was also afraid of him. He fought against admitting it, until he couldn't fight anymore. By then, it was too late." When Cooper asked directly, "Do you believe Nick killed his parents?" Billy did not hesitate or look away. "I believe Rob knew it was coming. That's why he insisted I read the will after he was gone. That's why he wrote it the way he did. Not to punish Nick, but to make sure the world would have no room for doubt." Asked whether he regretted speaking out, Billy's voice cracked. "I regret that I didn't drive to his house that day. I regret that I didn't hold him one more time. I regret that I didn't say, 'Let's get out of here right now. Let's figure this out together.'" He paused, then added softly, "But what I regret most is that Rob died afraid of the same son he once cradled in his arms." That 60 Minutes broadcast became the most watched program of the year, drawing more than 14 million views in its first 2 days. For once, the story was not about money, Hollywood scandal, or a fractured family. It became a story about loyalty, about the crushing weight of truth, and about the cost of being the one who must speak it. The moment that truly exploded across social media, however, was not from the television interview. It came from grainy courthouse footage leaked shortly after Billy finished reading the will. A reporter called out, "Mr. Crystal, what do you feel about Nick?" Billy stopped, turned toward the camera, and answered in a low, steady voice, "I feel pity for him, but I feel far greater pity for the man who did everything he could to save him, and paid for it with his life." Even that was not the full story. Billy has never spoken publicly about one final item Rob left behind. A sealed audio recording, time-stamped the day before his death, entrusted solely to Billy. When it was played, the words were stark and intimate. Rob did not dwell on accusations against Nick. Instead, he spoke of Romy and of his anguish over what might become of her. 11 words, simple, devastating, and deliberately restrained. "My son Nicholas will not inherit anything from my estate for reasons he knows well." He offered no further explanation. Legal analysts note that the brevity was almost certainly intentional. It was brutally cold. Tabloids sensationalized it as a bullet in a single sentence. To the handful of people who truly understood Rob Reiner, though, those 11 words constituted something far more deliberate, a father's final, unambiguous warning shot. A line drawn in permanent ink by a man who no longer trusted, or perhaps no longer loved, his own son, and who wanted the entire world to witness the severance. He could have written pages. He could have laid out every grievance, every incident of betrayal, every broken promise in exhaustive detail. Instead, he chose surgical precision, 11 words that granted the public unlimited room to speculate and imagine the worst. Crucially, the statement was never meant for journalists, probate courts, or public opinion. It was addressed to one person only, Nick. And Rob understood that those few words would land harder than any affidavit ever could. Estate attorneys almost never permit language this raw and personal in a will. The standard advice is clinical neutrality. Strip out emotion, eliminate drama, avoid anything that could be interpreted as spite. Rob deliberately rejected every rule in that playbook. He insisted the sentence remain exactly as written. He wanted it spoken aloud at the reading. He wanted it to echo long after he was gone. The timing made it even more chilling. The revised will was formally filed just 3 days before Rob and Michelle were killed. According to the estate attorney, Rob had called the day before to double-check. "Does it say precisely what I told you to say?" "Yes, Rob, word for word." A brief silence. Then, "Good. Then he'll understand how serious this is." So what exactly did Nick understand? What offense, or chain of offenses, had earned him this public excision? Threats? Physical violence? Years of psychological manipulation? Failed stints in treatment? The systematic theft of the family's peace? Or was there something even more sinister that never made it into court records? That single question lodged itself in Romy's mind and refused to leave. When Billy read the clause aloud in that flat, professional voice, she felt ice slide through her veins, not only because of the words themselves, but because of the way Billy's eyes widened, the way his voice faltered for a fraction of a second. Something unspoken passed between them. Later backstage, she cornered the lawyer. "Is there a sealed codicil? A private letter? Anything else?" He shook his head. "That line is the explanation." She walked away, shaken. Days later, a memory broke through. The summer of 2020, lockdown in the Brentwood house. She and Michelle chopping vegetables side by side. Rob pacing the patio, phone pressed to his ear. Nick had already been missing for hours. Romy had asked almost flippantly, "Do you think things will ever feel normal again?" Michelle stopped slicing, looked straight ahead. Some things can't go back to normal once you see who someone really is. Another small, devastating detail. The final executed copy of the will was not printed in Rob's usual elegant serif. It was Courier, stark, monospaced, screenplay font. Rob had turned his own death into the last scene of his final script. Those 11 words were the blackout line before fade out. Legal commentators argued for months. Tactical genius or vengeful theater? Could Nick contest it? No. Rob had inserted a classic no-contest clause with teeth, a true poison pill. Challenge the will and you forfeit everything, win or lose. Objecting would cost Nick far more than staying silent. That clause infuriated him, which in turn seemed to validate every fear Rob had expressed. Prison staff later reported that when Nick was first handed a copy of the will, he went completely still. He read it once, twice. Then he ripped the pages in half and screamed, "No, I get the last word." The outburst was noted in an incident report. It changed nothing. According to another inmate, Nick repeated variations of the same refrain for weeks. "I'll rewrite the ending. People will finally see who he really was." Delusion, wounded pride, or something far more ominous, or perhaps a toxic mixture of all three. Nick never accepted the verdict against him. In his mind, the phrase, "for reasons he knows well," was not merely disinheritance, it was character assassination, public shaming, the final theft of narrative control. He wanted payback, not just for money, but for dignity, legacy, authorship of the family story. His legal team tried to reframe the narrative: mental illness, emotional cruelty, parental deceit. None of it gained traction. The paper trail was devastating: threatening messages, audio files, documented violence, and most damning of all, a screenplay recovered from Nick's laptop titled The Unheard Son. It was billed as fiction. It read like a confession. A brilliant, misunderstood young man betrayed by a heartless, fame-obsessed father. In the final scene, the son does not lash out in blind fury. He executes his father deliberately, aesthetically, almost reverently. A closing title card. Sometimes you must end someone else's story to begin your own. When the prosecution read those pages into the record, the courtroom became so quiet you could hear breathing. People still ask, why only 11 words? Why no explanation? The answer is painfully simple. Rob Reiner spent a lifetime mastering economy of story. In 11 words, he delivered grief, fury, disillusionment, judgment, and closure, leaving his son, his daughter, the jury, and the public frozen in the dark of a theater with no more reels to run. Yet the person most haunted was Romy. She kept returning to one unbearable thought. Those 11 words were the very last thing her father ever wrote. He had chosen them knowing they would be the final thing anyone heard from him. And the story still wasn't finished. Years later, Romy, now hollowed out by grief and quiet rage, made the decision to unlock the one room in the house that had remained sealed since the murders. A room her father had entered alone. A room Nick had once been forbidden from ever approaching again. What Romy uncovered that day exposed a far more disturbing reality, one that implicated not only her brother Nick, but also reflected deep pain within her father Rob himself. She could scarcely process the horror before her. The door swung open with a faint creak. Romy assumed she was simply late for lunch, but an oppressive, unnatural quiet greeted her instead. The house felt suffocatingly still. She called out, "Mom!" No reply. "Dad!" Only silence answered. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor with every step, while a thick metallic odor filled the air. Turning into the living room, she spotted the first sign of chaos. A shattered family photo on the floor. The frame was broken, glass fragments sparkling everywhere. In the image, her parents and Nick had once beamed happily, now fractured, just like their family. Her phone slipped from her fingers unnoticed. As she pressed forward, a trail of dark blood led toward the master bedroom. "No, no, no," she murmured, yet she followed, already sensing the inevitable. Pushing the bedroom door open, Romy froze. Her father lay sprawled on the floor, one hand outstretched, eyes staring blankly. Her mother slumped against the bed, ashen-faced, lips sealed tight. Blood covered the room. The atmosphere felt choked by an unspoken scream. Romy blinked in disbelief, then let out a piercing scream. Her 911 call lasted 6 minutes and 11 seconds, filled with raw panic. Yet what struck listeners most wasn't just the terror. It was her unwavering conviction. When the dispatcher asked who might be responsible, Romy, sobbing but resolute, answered, "Nick, my brother. I know he did this." That absolute certainty chilled the responding officers. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. She was sure. And the roots of that certainty stretched back years. Michelle's startled expression when Nick entered a room, Rob's watchful gaze over him at dinner, the oddly secured doors. Most hauntingly, that Thursday evening 3 nights before the murders, when Romy arrived late to deliver script pages to her father, an encounter that would scar her forever. This is the story of a fractured family, overshadowed by fear, rage, and long-buried secrets. Rob Reiner's death wasn't merely an end. Through connections like his work with Billy Crystal, it became a desperate, unspoken plea for the truth to surface. Even amid such darkness, moments of light endure. Love, loyalty, and the difficult choices people face under crushing fear. Romy's bravery in confronting what others might deny reminds us that painful truths, however brutal, can sometimes be the only path to freedom. The real lesson here goes beyond wealth, fame, or inheritance. It lies in how we nurture or shatter the bonds of family, those ties that leave permanent marks on our lives. Thanks for staying until the end. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more gripping, thought-provoking real-life accounts. And never forget, no matter how hard it hurts, the truth deserves to be told. Let's step back to how it all began. Nick Reiner was once seen as Hollywood's next big talent, son of director Rob Reiner and grandson of comedy icon Carl Reiner. Raised in an environment where creativity came naturally, he appeared on screens and red carpets as the apparent successor to a storied legacy. But beneath the glamour, his path veered sharply. Public records show Nick battled addiction from a young age. Drugs, alcohol, and repeated rehab stints marked his 20s with chaos. The weight of the family name, combined with mental health struggles and an uneven career, made stability elusive. Past incidents grabbed headlines briefly before fading, yet the underlying damage only deepened. Rob never abandoned his son. In 2015, they collaborated on Being Charlie, a semi-autobiographical film about addiction recovery, Rob's heartfelt effort to guide Nick toward healing. Sadly, the project underperformed, dealing Nick a crushing setback. Hope flickered out, and he increasingly withdrew, retreating from the world. This leads to the guest house on the family property where Nick lived for years. After the tragedy, police described it as dim, isolated, with closed curtains, sparse furniture, and signs of profound solitude. Among the items found, a locked fireproof box holding an old knife, not linked directly to the crime, but preserved with care, almost symbolically. A vague note with it read more like a cryptic warning than a plan. Journals and writings revealed Nick's deep sense of being sidelined, replaced, and excluded from his own family, intensely personal feelings, though not official investigative findings. Investigators zeroed in on one key question: how Nick became aware of changes to the will. The software update had been formally signed just days before the tragedy occurred, and according to available records, it was known to only a handful of people. During the investigation, detectives uncovered signs that Nick might have been quietly accessing private family conversations through unofficial channels. Although this possibility was closely examined, it was never conclusively proven or made public. Additionally, hidden inside a concealed drawer in the desk, investigators recovered a collection of letters that Rob had written to Nick across many years. The letters traced an emotional arc, from expressions of hope and pride, through growing disappointment, and finally into deepening fear and despair. They painted the portrait of a father who had done everything he could, yet felt himself slipping into powerlessness. When these letters were considered together with the new will's explicit clause, "My son Nicholas shall receive no portion of my estate, for reasons of which he is fully aware," many legal and psychological experts concluded that the emotional impact on Nick would have been devastating and almost unavoidable. Yet Nick was not the only one harboring secrets. Among the digital files recovered from Rob's secure environment, SE, police located a folder of covert audio recordings of family discussions. One brief clip in particular drew attention. It captured Rob openly voicing serious worry about his son's psychological well-being. The recording abruptly cut to static, leaving significant portions of the conversation unexplained and open to speculation. Afterward, Nick simply disappeared. There was no dramatic scene, no visible distress. Surveillance footage from a gas station located far from the incident showed him quietly purchasing a bottle of water before walking out of frame, calm and composed. That silence, however, proved temporary. Another individual, who understood the Reiner family dynamics more intimately than almost anyone, and who had deliberately stayed away for years, was now preparing to come forward. What this person held back could fundamentally alter the way the entire case is understood.